Hello and welcome back. We're still not doing any active forge work, but we're getting much closer. The finger's healing nicely, and I'll update you on that at the end of the video. Today, though, I would like to talk about what is blacksmithing. It seems like a simple question, but it's a much argued question online, and I'm not necessarily going to solve all the world's questions and answer definitively what I think you have to believe. I am going to voice my opinion, and it is just that. It is just my opinion. But I'm hoping that maybe I can shed some light on what really is blacksmithing versus other crafts that are companion crafts to blacksmithing, or completely separate trades from blacksmithing. I alluded to this the other day when we were talking about books. I made mention of a quote from George Dixon that he put in the front of every traditional metalsmith, and the quote is, "Blacksmithing is not defined by time period or motif. Blacksmithing is defined by process alone." I think that's, for me anyways, that really sums it up. There are processes that are something a blacksmith has to be able to do that other craftspeople don't have to be able to do. And there are processes that many blacksmiths can do, but also many other craftspeople do, and they are not required for blacksmithing. Quite simply, most blacksmithing takes place right here at the anvil with a hammer. And the processes of blacksmithing are generally the processes that go right along with the hot work at the anvil. It's things like drawing out, upsetting, cutting or slitting with a chisel or a hardy at the anvil. It's forge welding, it's bending, it's twisting. And for the most part, those are all the processes that are involved in blacksmithing. Making a mortise and tenon joint involves drawing out, it involves slitting or punching, it involves upsetting the head on the tenon, and it's all those techniques that all come together to make a project in blacksmithing. Rarely is one technique used in exclusion to all the others. To be a competent, well-rounded blacksmith, you need to know most or all of those techniques. Forge welding is the one that oftentimes gets left behind, and that's because people like to arc weld, and I understand that temptation. But the other question that I would like to answer today is the question of, does it matter? Does it really matter how we define blacksmithing, or what we consider traditional blacksmithing versus contemporary blacksmithing? And to a large degree, it is absolutely irrelevant. It makes no difference whatsoever. The rest of the world could care less what we as blacksmiths think for the most part, unless you are in a pre-industrial third world country where blacksmiths still play an important role in the society. Probably you're not needed as a blacksmith. I hate to say that, but I think it's the truth. Industry has left blacksmiths behind for years. Blacksmithing today is more about aesthetics, it's about art, it's about making functional things that have a taste of the history of where blacksmiths came from. It isn't because only a blacksmith can do these things today. I make a lot of hinges. You can go to any home center hardware store and buy all the hinges you want, and they're all going to work, and they're all going to hold your door up or hold your cabinet door on. You don't need to pay 5, 10, 20 times as much to buy a hinge from me. So why do people do that? It's because of the look, it's because of the romance or some aesthetic, something in them I want hand forged. And I'd like to believe that hand forged is in fact higher quality. I think I make a product that is much more heavy duty and much more durable and will last the ages compared to what you buy at the home center. But people don't really need a blacksmith. It's not something that the local community isn't desperate to have a blacksmith down the street to make and repair things like they were 150 years ago. So does it matter how we define it? Well, I think it does. Even though I think society could care less, and maybe in your shop you can define things the way you like to, and in my shop I'll define them differently. But the reason I think it matters is because that's our chance to educate the public. It's our chance to promote and preserve the craft. It's very easy for us to be distracted by new techniques, new methods, new materials. But for me anyways, that is not why I got into blacksmithing. I did not get into blacksmithing just to make things out of metal. I got into blacksmithing to forge things out of metal. It's not about just building a gate. It's about forging the parts to build a gate. It's about the traditional joinery. It's not about the arc welder and the chop saw and the bandsaw. And if that's what you like to use, that's fine. I'm not saying you can't use those things. And hopefully I never come across as saying you can't use them. I just don't see those things as blacksmithing. There are blacksmiths out there who don't know how to weld. And it's easy to pick on welding. Welding is not the only thing that falls into this category. But you don't have to know how to use a MIG welder or a TIG welder or stick or a torch. You don't need to know how to use a mill or a lathe or even own a drill press or a grinder to be a blacksmith. You can be one of the world's best blacksmiths, and in fact your blacksmithing skills will improve if you don't have any of those things. On the opposite side of that, you can be the best welder in the world, the best fabricator in the world, the best machinist, the best grinder, whatever professional outlets there are for people that don't do anything grinding, if there is such a thing these days, and not know anything about blacksmithing. It's not required of you. They are separate entities. They are separate crafts, separate trades. And I try to keep things as much in the blacksmithing side of the fence as I can, because that's what attracts me to this. And I'm hoping that's what I'm bringing to you with this channel, is a chance to see blacksmithing. I'm going to deviate from time to time. I guarantee you're going to see sparks from the arc welder at some point. We've already done some torch welding. I've talked about buying plasma cut blanks instead of cutting them with a chisel, which would be the traditional way a blacksmith would do it. And I recognize that there are times where that's the appropriate method, the appropriate technique in today's modern world. But it depends on what you're doing and why you're doing it. There are people out there who don't use any of that stuff. And they are some of the blacksmiths that I respect the most. If I had to start all over again and completely reimagine myself as a blacksmith, I would probably tend to go more towards the 100% hand tools and try to learn how to do things without some of these modern conveniences. But I'm kind of old and set in my ways. I probably won't do that. So it's not that I don't think welding isn't valuable or that a plasma cutter can't be a valuable tool. I just don't see them as being of themselves blacksmithing. There are two big arguments that come out anytime this comes up. Number one is if they'd had it, they'd have used it. And the second one is it's all the same. Well, I hope I just explained why it's not all the same, because it is different. And I will try to explain as I go through things and show pieces that we're working on and making as part of a how-to video why it is different to do the things traditionally than it is to do things with modern equipment. Chisel cutting can really enhance a project versus having it plasma cut. It leaves a telltale signature behind that really adds to the aesthetic value of some things. Some things it doesn't matter, and that's why some of these things I will have plasma cut. But on a lot of things, you'll notice the difference. Arc welding is not the same as a mortise and tenon joint. Yes, it gets the piece assembled, but it's not the same. There are differences. If they'd have had it, they'd have used it? Absolutely they would have. If Lewis and Clark had had an airplane, they would have flown to the Pacific coast instead of going by foot and by boat. Heavens, they weren't fools. Of course they would have done that. But if you want to experience what they experienced, if you want to see what they saw, even though most of it's gone today, you can't do it but from the air. You can do it somewhat from a vehicle, but if you really wanted to relive it, you'd go spend a year and do it by boat and by foot. And the same thing is true with blacksmithing. If you want to be a blacksmith, if it's really about forging, and that is your primary goal, you need to step away from the arc welder and the plasma cutter more often. don't throw them away. I'm not telling you to get rid of that stuff. But the more you can do things the way blacksmiths have done it for thousands of years, the better a blacksmith you're going to be. Back to if they'd had it, they'd have used it. Absolutely true again. Blacksmiths did get arc welders. They did get machine tools. And they quit being blacksmiths. They started being machinists. They started being welders. And that's one of the reasons we don't need blacksmiths today in industry, because we need machinists and welders. That's just the way it is. So I don't think the argument is valid, because we're not trying to re-evolve blacksmithing. As you evolve in that line, you get away from blacksmithing. Blacksmithing ceases to be important, and you start doing other things. Heavens, if blacksmiths 300 years ago had had a 3D printer that printed iron, they wouldn't have stood there with the anvil by the hot forge. They would have set it up in their computer, they would have printed it. But I don't think anybody's going to argue that 3D printed iron hinges or 3D printing a railroad spike knife is blacksmithing. It's a ludicrous argument in my mind. So it's not all the same. It's not about the finished product. It's about how you get there. So I hope you enjoy your journey, and I hope you stick around. I'm not trying to chase you off. If you like to weld, but still like to watch the videos, stick around. We'll have lots more where I don't get up on my soapbox and preach, or rant, or whatever you want to call it. But I guess one more thing before we go. It's the term traditional. And that gets bantied around, and people who like to weld and like plasma cutters don't like the word traditional. They use the argument, and I saw this on somebody else's channel, I can't remember whose, that traditional is specific to a time and to a place. And I think that's not really true. Traditional is handed down through history, which means that there are certain things that have always been a part of the world of blacksmithing. It's not about whether you burn coal or charcoal or propane. The metal doesn't care how it gets heated. It's about the techniques used to forge the metal. It's not about having electric lights in your shop. If you want to do historical reenactment, then those things become important. If you are reenacting a Viking era blacksmith, you need to smelt your own iron, and you need to make your own charcoal, and you need to work on a little tiny anvil by firelight or by sunlight. You're not going to work at night. You're not going to have power tools. But that isn't traditional. That is historic reenactment, and there is a difference. To me, traditional blacksmithing is using the techniques of the blacksmith, drawing out, upsetting, punching, twisting, bending, cutting, forge welding, and creating beautiful work with that. It's hot collars and rivets and mortise and tenon joints instead of welds. It's forge welds instead of arc welds. It's forge brazing. It's so many things that are done by a blacksmith and have been for ages, and there are so many things you can do with it that I don't think we really need to argue what is traditional and what is not, unless you're looking for an excuse to do things that are not traditional. And you don't need an excuse. If that's what you want to do, do it. It's fine. I'm not going to tell you not to. I know that I've repeated this several times, but I want to make sure you don't think that I'm trying to say you can't do that. It's semantics, and I am trying to, so that when you listen to my channel, understand what I'm saying when I say traditional technique, traditional joinery, traditional tooling, or this is blacksmithing, or if we go to the welder, well, we're not blacksmithing right now. Or if we go to the wood shop to make a handle for something, well, that's not blacksmithing. Anyways, okay, I'm getting carried away here. I don't need to do that. Don't want to chase off anybody else. Since we quit blacksmithing, we aren't picking up subscribers like we were, which is too bad. But if you like it and you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. We will be back to blacksmithing. The finger is getting much better. You'll notice the bandage is a lot smaller. I've actually got 4 fingers out of it now instead of just 3. And I actually get to take the bandage off every day as long as I'm not someplace dirty like a blacksmith shop. But it'll be another week before they take the stitches out, and maybe then we'll be back to doing a little bit of blacksmithing. Probably a week after that, I'll probably be back to full swing. So I appreciate you stopping by. Hope you liked it. Hit that thumbs up button if you did. Like I say, I'd love it if you'd hit the subscribe button. I know that sitting around listening to me talk is not as much fun as watching me forge iron, but I promise we'll get back to that. If you'd like to support the channel financially, there's a link down in the description, and you can hit that and take you to PayPal. No obligation, the content is free. In the meantime, go to the shop, have fun, whether you're arc welding or torch welding or using your plasma cutter, or hopefully you're blacksmithing and you're forging something using traditional techniques. Stay safe, and we will see you later.